Money. The game everyone plays, but few win. Extracting the knowledge from the top 1%. And teaching you the ever-changing rules of play. It's time to level up and take control of the money game.
Let's talk money.
Big money. Yes!
Welcome back to the Money Game. We have a special guest, one of my longtime friends, Hailame. How are you, my man?
My man, dude, I appreciate you having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm doing great.
Dude, good to have you on. Stoked that you can take some time to share some wisdom with us today, dude.
Dude, hopefully, man. We'll see. I'm a huge fan of the podcast, man. I think I've listened to every episode, so you've had some dogs. I'm just excited to have a seat at the table, you know?
Dude, we appreciate it. You're a dog on your own, and I'm just out here learning from people smarter than myself, man. That's what I do with this. It's a lot of fun. But little background on you. Obviously, dude, you've had a diverse career. Obviously, you started in a similar space as myself. We definitely want to dive into that. But right now, you are the owner of Elk Ridge Management. Give us just a little bit on what you guys are doing right now, and then we'll run back.
For sure. So Elk Ridge Management is essentially a real estate company that deals with all things short-term, mid-term rental. It's kind of what we specialize in. We do everything from acquisitions. If you have just an idea and you want to get it started, but you don't know where to start, we help with acquiring all the way to the end product of you have a beautiful listing that's designed, has great SEO, and is being managed. So we're essentially that niche in real estate of, hey, if you want to get into Airbnb, talk to us.
Love it. Airbnb is obviously crazy sexy right now. I know multiple people who are kind of getting in. I know some people who've gotten in, and I think I've actually brought your name up to quite a handful of people that have gotten out as the self-management of it has gotten a little trickier or just like more time consuming than they anticipated. Do you guys feel, is that kind of like more of where the value add is from Elk Ridge as far as like partnering with people primarily on short-term, mid-term rentals?
Oh, absolutely. Short-term rentals, I heard an analogy once that I thought was extremely accurate. Short-term rentals is similar to like skiing, right? You could know absolutely nothing, but you can still make it down to the end of the hill. But depending on, how long you've been doing it for, your systems, your processes, right? Like that journey is going to look a lot different, right? And with the STR game, I mean, your margins, you're making 3, 4, sometimes 10x more than traditional renting. But the downfall of it, right, is that it's sometimes 1,000 times the work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so what we've specialized in is really just making that really, really easy for people that have investments. And, our processes and our avatars developed. I think originally we were really bullish on just getting as much, people in as possible to where we can manage their properties. And now it's kind of shifted where we like to focus more on the investor avatar. That tends to be the people that we work with primarily, people with multiple doors. So.
Gotcha. So a little bit less of just like the entry player and more of somebody who's at least in a wealth building investor mindset.
Absolutely. Not that we won't take people just starting, but we just are very upfront about the expectations of, what the process looks like. And typically people that, it's their first STR, there's a lot of emotion, naturally so. I get it, and STR is different than a long-term lease. There's a bit more risk because you don't know if people are going to book or not, right? But we've naturally just tended to gravitate more towards people that, are doing big business. And that's kind of who we'd like to look for, correct?
Very cool. Very cool. Well, dude, we definitely want to dive into those numbers because, right, I think people right now listening are hearing like 10 times the normal rental, right? Like that's pretty sexy. Yeah. You can get 10 times the normal long-term rent. And I've got a bunch of buddies that are doing it here in Kansas City. I don't have anything short-term rental right now, but we're looking at some options, some different stuff. So I'll have to pick your head off air, but the return differential, like the spread is nuts what some of these dudes are doing. And these are people who like don't even know what the heck is going on with real estate. Like they just bought a crib, they put it up on Airbnb, found out how to a super host and they're just like rolling it themselves, cleaning it themselves.
Sure.
And it's a lot of fun. But obviously, you just said something pretty impactful, right? Your new avatar is kind of the investor. And so I think most people don't just like walk into the investor situation. I think that's like a maturity of a financial development where you get to that point that, in my opinion, at least from what I've seen, most people get there after they've started to make relatively good income at some point and started to see some scale. So, dude, I definitely want to go through a little bit of your story of, where you started and how you got to this point where you had the faith to kind of jump off and start a company.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I'd love to share, man, because it's to your point, like I said, going back to that analogy, right? Like you don't really need to know a ton to make money, but if you can really learn very specific strategies and create some systems, I mean, it's been real good. It's been a really quick rise to some great money to a 7-figure business for me. So I'm excited to share.
Dude, that's freaking awesome. So walk me through. I know obviously you started in a similar space to me. For anybody who doesn't know, direct to home sales. And I know you've been in a couple different channels, not even just the security and the solar side. You've done, multiple products. That industry, I feel like, builds more high-level entrepreneurs, at least from the people in Utah. It's like, dude, everybody who owns something did at least a year, 2, 3, 4 years in the space. What do you feel like in that space in any way prepared you mentally, financially to kind of like pivot into this role?
Dude, that is such a powerful question. And it's huge, right? Because the investor space, I'm sorry, my daughter. Hey, princess. Oh, I'm sorry, dude. The kiddos.
You're chilling.
My wife turns around for a second and they bolt, But going back to your original question, dude, people don't understand the value of the door-to-door space. They really don't. The door-to-door space, I would say to me, is a direct factor to my success, especially how far this company's gone. Just to to your point, and this, I mean, the mental fortitude it takes to knock doors is just that in and of itself is a huge asset that can be leveraged when you start to build a business.
Yeah.
And then people don't realize too, when you're building really a door-to-door business or door-to-door team like we have, that really, even though I guess you're a contractor for a bigger company, really what you do is you start a business, right? You're a business owner when you're running an efficient team, right? And so there's a lot of transferable skills from that industry to this business that have really, really honestly served me well. But I could say at the top of it is really just the ability to sell, right? Because when you knock on a door and somebody's coming out swinging, but 45 minutes later, you're walking out the door with a signed contract, you have a cold Coke in your hand, and they want you to marry their daughter, right? That what happens in between that? Oh, exactly, right. And what happens in between that time frame is really just really valuable life lessons and skills that are developed, right? And that's really what helped me kind of make that transition. I tell everybody all the time, they always ask me, hey, how'd you do this? And I was like, hey, go knock some doors. Like, knock some doors. That is by far the best entrepreneurial thing that you'd be able to do for yourself.
Yeah, I love that you said. I literally tell, and I know we've chatted about my program quite a bit in the past, and my huge emphasis is like, dude, this is a crash course to entrepreneurism. You want to learn to scale, you want to learn to develop, you want to learn to create revenue, know what it takes to create culture. I have a really hard time. I met with some college kids the other day. I'm like, dude, you want to be an accountant, you want to be in finance, you want to be in real estate, you want to do whatever it is you want to do. There's absolutely no way that this isn't the most valuable thing you can do at this time. And I think too, as well, when I'm talking to this younger generation, I think even people our age and maybe 10 years plus, I feel like everybody has this weird thing where it's like going into sales, they think like they're going to master the skills to run a business in like just the 4 months and they underestimate how short 5 years is too, right? Like I'm sure your time at door to door, dude, feels like a memory from the past, like how fast it went.
Absolutely.
And it's crazy because like, even the 6 years I've been in the space, it feels like I'm just getting started. But the things that I'm doing on the side with it have all 100% been driven, the experiences, the mentality, everything that's risen to the point of like, I believe in myself to execute on anything. To your point, kind of the mental fortitude, I want to dig in on that because, right, you jumped into a space and I want to know, as you were doing door to door, had you been doing any short-term rental stuff, or like when you went, did you just like full launch into the pivot, or had you like, kind of tapered into that?
Yeah, good question. So I got started. So I've been doing Airbnb for about 4 years, and I was doing it pretty much in tandem with door to door,
Yeah.
just with my own properties. And I was doing it the boring way, which was essentially just buy one property, rent it, buy another, rent it, right? And what I didn't know over the course of the 3 years leading up to starting this business at the beginning of this year was I was really more or less becoming an expert in the STR space, just passively, right? Just because I was doing on my own, and I was always trying to improve my listings and trying to figure that out. And so that was where really Elk Ridge Management started, was 4 years ago. But when I decided that I wanted to kind of jump all in at the beginning of the year, I looked back and I realized that I had a lot of assets that have been developed that would lend itself to this. One being I was doing short terms already, but then two, just the whole door-to-door industry and learning that, that skill set of managing business, managing people, relationships, and sales, right? So it kind of just worked itself out to where when I really didn't realize the value of sales until I really started this business, because, you and I both know in the door-to-door industry, for those people, people that are listening that don't know, there's a lot of money in it, right? Yeah. You're making multiple six figures, and, you're working, sure, you have a full grind in the summer, but, you're still working off season, but it's less of a grind, right? And you have more control of your time. And so you kind of get in this echo chamber. When I was in the door-to-door industry, you're in this echo chamber of like, man, this is where I'm going to make all my money, right? This is where I'm going to make my wealth, and this is where we're going to take off. And I didn't realize that once I stepped into the STR space, that value of that skill selling was just a lot more valuable in the Airbnb space, in my experience, right? Yeah. And so it served me well to where now, here we are, and last month I think we did 200,000 top line. So it's been huge, dude. It's been awesome.
That's so awesome. And dude, I want to dig even on that a little more too, because I think you and I have both been in the space, and I think historically there's been a little bit of a, quite frankly, like, it opens a ton of people's eyes as they start getting into sales to the income that's available. But then it also creates this like paradoxical scarcity mindset of like, there's no other ways to make money. This is the only place you can get it done. And I've never been a believer of that, just because I didn't come from the space. I didn't grow up in Utah. And I know obviously you're proving that it's not. So as you developed, kind of your internal thermometer of like, dude, I'm worth more, I'm making more, I feel like you took it to the next level, which I personally believe this is the evolution of the door-to-door space. I think if people aren't entering it with the recognition of like, I'm going to add ancillary pieces to my portfolio along the way, or I'm going to build to a point, to an exit, to a next step, that you're doing it wrong. And it's built to do that. Like, that's what it's built to do realistically. So you, like, how did you cross that threshold mentally of like, dude, I've got this thing, I know how to do it down pat, I can make multiple six figures, to then get creative and say, hey, I'm not just going to like do the normal investment thing on the side, which, to your point again, it's like, dude, I've done a lot of commercial and multifamily, but the short term is like super creative. It really is like its own ultra niche in itself. At what point did you just be like, you and your wife sit down like, dude, hey, these skills are good, this is there, like, but we believe in ourselves enough? I feel like that's where a lot of people miss.
Yeah. No, and I think you articulated just in that short bit the door-to-door industry to a T. Because, at a certain point, typically earlier in your career, you're super bought in. I was, right? Yeah. And I was like, this is it. This is where I'm going to make my money, is where I'm going to retire. And it is an amazing opportunity, right? But there's two things that I think every entrepreneur kind of comes to. And the first one for me was it's not about money. It's more than the money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was family, right? Like the grind of deploying for the summer, certain things that you're well aware of that kind of have an effect on your family. That was the first kind of, I think, tier that kind of made me start to think, man, maybe I need to start looking into different ways to make money. But then the second is to your point, like just the idea of wanting more and thinking there has to be more somewhere else, And so, and for a long time I was doing it in tandem, and those two thought processes are developed over a long period of time, right? I didn't just wake up one day and, hey, I'm going to do Airbnb. It's through progressive years of just feeling like, hey, I need to make a jump. Where should I start? Where should I go? And it was kind of a gradual. So I can't tell you that there was like a aha moment, but it really was a developed process with those two thoughts always in the back of my head of like, hey, I can't keep doing this to my family. There needs to be a better way that doesn't take so much time from me away from them. But then also there has to be something else where I can 10X,
Dude, totally. I love that you said it, it just didn't happen overnight, because I think there is this misbelief. Everybody now hears you got the Hermosi, you got all of these like ultra visible successful people, and they're always talking about leverage. Like, how much can you displace yourself? But what I've seen, and I think you're just a great example, and I think I've done a good job in myself just in a different niche, is you've got to lay the foundation of like trading that time first. Like, you have to have the skills, and it takes 3, 4, 5, 6 years, whatever it is, not just to have the skill, but like to mature emotionally and thought process wise and abundance wise.
Absolutely.
Like, hey, I can now pivot into this, and now I can apply a shit ton of leverage because I've done 4 on my own. I've made a couple $100,000, but like I can see now, because I've created all these micro transactions in the door-to-door space. Well, dude, if I just plug into bigger transactions, put team in, I know how to close these deals down.
Absolutely. And that, it's funny because that really, there's a point in time where you look back and you realize how much you have developed with that mindset, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these skills, because to your point,
no way around it. You got to go through it.
Exactly. Right. And I think the most important part for anybody is just having that in the forefront of your mind of there's more and I can do more and get more. And as you constantly are chasing more, you look back and you realize like really what you've developed and the skills you've developed. Because like I said, right, like at a certain point, I was going to die in the door-to-door industry. And it wasn't that just overnight, I just, I decided to change course. It was just through time I evolved, I developed, and then we just happened to transition into Airbnb and it worked out, right? So.
And I think too, that's an important distinction for people, especially in the door-to-door space. And any of my reps listening, don't bounce. But I think people come to me and they're like, okay, you have this huge, real estate portfolio on the side. Like, why don't you go full time? And just like you said, I love that, you tapered in. It wasn't like, hey, this isn't getting it done. Let me find a new thing. I think the acquisition and accumulation of skills and opportunities led to a moment where at that point, I'm sure you and your wife, the marginal risk for you now to pivot was a lot less. And it just was the natural progression of things.
Absolutely.
And I think so many people try to go find some like next silver bullet, but like a guy we know really well, right? Casey Baugh, 20 years. I'm sure he's made more money at Sandlot doing this private equity and all this stuff than he probably was making at Vivint. But had he not built those 20 years of relationships, done all the micro investments, all the micro syndications, there's no way he could have stepped into that type of a role.
Absolutely. That's well said. And to your point too, right? Like you don't get to that point of kind of the natural progression to the next thing unless you're progressively improving yourself with the capacity you're at currently. Right.
Like that.
It just doesn't happen unless you're working on yourself within your capacity. You get better there, and then other opportunities and other doors open up. Right.
I love that. Yeah. I'm sure you follow Hermosi, but he's always on the attack where you're at, serve where you've been. And dude, I think that is probably some of the most profoundly simple advice. It's, dude, if you're attacking where you're at and you're just serving where you're at, where you've been most recently, your lid just gets higher and higher, because as you help people do what you are really, really good at, it just builds the base even bigger. And the next opportunity, you don't even have to find it. Like, it just naturally falls into place.
Absolutely. And it attracts you, right? Like it comes to you. I think the backside of this thought process is all of those entrepreneurs that as soon as they hate it, they bounce, right? And we all know those guys that are just entrepreneurs that are just bouncing everywhere. And a lot of it is because they haven't taken time to essentially stand still and develop skills and dig into where you're at. And people don't realize that that's the magic sauce, because when you get really good at what you're doing and where you're at and continually improving yourself, then other doors and opportunities come to you, you know?
Yeah. I think that's a super important point that you said, that so many people miss, and we're all victim to it at time. But what you just said, it's like, dude, you have got to be killing a space for a while. It's going to come. And I think it's a really high level skill to know, when are you just running away from something as an entrepreneur and just bouncing from get rich to get rich to get rich to get rich, versus when do you legitimately have an opportunity to go sideways and then raise your lid because of the skills that you've acquired. Absolutely. I think that's a really hard distinction for people.
Yeah, no, well said. Well said.
Well, dude, I definitely want to dive into just Elkridge specifically for an investing standpoint. For you, obviously you're working with tons and tons of people. I'm sure you probably even have, hopefully, I know a ton of people that are in the space that still admire you, man. I'm sure there's a lot of people who should be partnering with Elkridge versus trying to figure it out on their own. What's the reason somebody should be playing the short-term rental game right now versus just the traditional, like, why is the reason you're in it? Why should we all be looking at this?
Yeah. So I think it's funny because the answer to that question has changed and developed, especially over the last year with the turn of the market.
Okay.
Right. Before it was like, hey, like, money's good, money's flowing in the economy. You're going to 10x what you would normally do traditionally. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's still the case in a lot of different instances. But I think even more so with the shift of the economy, now it's become, in many cases, when you acquire, the only way to be profitable, right? With high interest rates and, purchase prices tanking, in some instances now short-term rental or mid-term rental is the only way to remain profitable on a property. And for us, there's been a lot of opportunities for us to partner with people or acquire creatively certain properties just because they just came out of a flip just a few weeks ago and interest rates are, 7 to 8 plus, And so it's like, how do you cash flow that on a traditional rental? You can't. Yeah. Right. And so people are led back to us. And so that question over time has developed, and I think it's going to keep changing, right? Like, the market's going to keep changing. I think it's going to get a little bit worse before it starts getting better. And I think that's going to present a lot more opportunities for us to help people who have these insane interest rates on properties cash flow, or at the very least not go negative, just kind of maintain it.
I think from an interesting that is really, really interesting. That's something I haven't even thought about, just because I don't do a ton of single family stuff at all anymore. Just, more doors, the business easier to scale and understand. But it is interesting, as I've looked into the STR space, like, dude, some of the cash flows that a single asset can kick off is ridiculous. Some of the numbers I'm looking at, I'm just like, dude, this doesn't even seem possible. You could control an asset kicking off this type of return. So obviously you guys have tons and tons of high performing Airbnb assets that either, I'm sure you guys hold your own too as well, don't you?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. As you guys are looking at all this and all your experience, what should people be looking for in terms of, like, what makes a killer short-term rental?
Really good question. So there's a lot of factors. But really, I would say that question and knowing the answer to that is the most important before you step into the space. Mm-hmm. And really, that's just done by due diligence, just knowing your market, knowing your avatar and the reasons why they're there. Funny enough, so we have a pretty large portfolio, especially here in Utah. We manage about going closer to 80 now. But some of the properties that are doing the very best are just the single family and just normal residential neighborhoods. And the reason for that is because the avatar is a bit more stable, right? People are coming in Utah, the LDS church. There's a lot of reasons for that: baptisms, ordinances, weddings. There's a lot of universities, schools, graduations, and that avatar is going to come in a recession, right? When people are hurting,
things are happening regardless.
Exactly, right. Whereas like St. George, right, and Park City, right, and Moab, these are areas in Utah that are significantly affected with the turn of the economy, because the first thing that people cross off their list in a recession is vacation. Yep. And so really my strategy has changed significantly to where a lot of my portfolio actually consists of just normal houses. And it's because those normal houses are doing consistently more than, some of these more destination spots. Granted, they're still, that's not your end all. You still got to make sure that, it's close to, points of interest, right? Close to schools, close to the freeway. And then also understanding the seasonality of it. Utah has, 4 main down seasons, 4 months that are kind of lower than the rest. And so you have to kind of hedge your bet against those and figure out how to make money during those. And so but it's to answer your question directly. Yeah, really, I'm looking at location first. I'm understanding my avatar. And then the third is just making sure that, in the Airbnb space, you got to spend money to make money. It used to be you could just throw up, a freaking bet on bricks and it'd get booked.
Yeah.
But it's very competitive now, right? And so you got to stand out. Beautiful design, amenities, amazing pictures. So there's a lot that goes into it, but those would be my 3 pointers to anybody looking into it and being like, what's good Airbnb? Location, knowing your avatar, and then just being really competitive on your listing.
That's honestly really, I obviously just don't have anything in the STR space, but I would, in my head immediately, I think everybody just goes towards, what's the major sports teams, crazy attractions, but it makes a ton of sense. A university where people are coming in for graduations, events, football games, like that doesn't stop in a recession.
Correct.
It's always going on. All these high traffic areas just for big family, big seasonal stuff that's like on autopilot recurring. That's very interesting. And then you brought up something that I know a ton of people have questions to, and I've even asked this myself, right? Like from just like an algorithm standpoint, you're really competing with all of the same tools that everybody has. Like when we go market a multifamily, like we're the only unit, right, that like has that. So we're independent, but you're all using the same, it's like me trying to go against Kylie Miller or Jenner on freaking Instagram. Like, I ain't going to win.
Yeah.
So how do you play like the Airbnb game well? Once you have it up, you're doing well. How do you like optimize the ability to get booked?
Absolutely. That's a very intelligent question that people don't know to ask when they step into the space normally. Because it's a lot more than just, a beautiful looking property. There's a whole SEO game to it, right? Algorithms and trying to figure out those. And, I could go on and on about that. But really it's just understanding
that you guys do for clients is kind of
correct.
All the SEO optimization. Okay. That's huge. Yep. That's huge.
Oh yeah.
That's a whole pain in the ass in itself. Like,
if
you don't have SEO and if you don't even know what that acronym means, then you definitely need Elkridge management.
Absolutely. No. And you're exactly right. Right. That's really the value of hiring, not just myself, but any operator that knows what they're doing. Yeah. Right. They understand that there's an algorithm in place and there's certain things you can or can't do to make sure that when somebody searches a city that you're in, you want to be the first of 5 to pop up. Right. Mm-hmm. And that is huge in terms of marketing, especially in a competitive place. So like just understanding that there is one and paying for an operator that understands it or investing in yourself to learn it. I think is a big one. And then the second one that I would say is a huge, again, we could open Pandora's box, but I'll kind of just give tip of the iceberg, is your pricing strategy, right? I know when a host is competitive or not within really 2 seconds of looking at their listing because of their pricing strategy. If every day is the same, they don't know what they're doing. If they have maybe 2 different prices, just the weekdays is one price and weekends are a little bit more expensive. Those are very weak pricing strategies. They're not even pricing strategies, right? Yeah. What we do is we're very focused on data, understanding, your price ceiling and your price floor given the season of the market, right? During this season right now, this month, my pricing for the first 2 weeks of December, my price floor and my price ceiling are going to look a lot different than Christmas, just because when Christmas hits, demand shoots through the roof, and I want to be priced aggressively to where I'm getting as much on the table as I can, right? And there's a lot of ways to do that and understand it, but I would say that's the other big piece of working with somebody that knows what they're doing or optimizing your own is just the SEO and the pricing strategy.
And that makes a ton of sense. I didn't even think, where do you guys pull, or where could anybody go as they're starting if they're not ready to use managed? Like, where do you go to even get some of that stuff? Because, right, like in a long-term rental, you're just going market rents. Anybody can Google that in 5 minutes and see, my above par living space, below par living space, what's normal. But there's a huge difference of Park City December through February versus Park City in March.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that data really, there's a few places. And I think, as Airbnb becomes more accepted and more utilized, there's going to be more data that comes out. But right now we use AirDNA is a huge resource. And then the second is Price Labs. And those are the two that we use. But even between those two, there's a lot of like trial and error that needs to go into it. And just, we have a big enough portfolio now that we can kind of pull from our data and essentially, just try
just
things
internally from your own stuff.
Exactly. Right. Because even those two that I mentioned are kind of just benchmarks, but there's still a lot of money left on the table by just trying new things and adjusting. Right. And so, but that's where I would start is AirDNA and Price Labs would be where I would start if you're looking to understand kind of pricing.
Yeah. Big stuff. The last thing, I could ask some super, but I know we could probably go for hours and hours on some of this stuff and people would love it. When you are the host, though, I know some of the people I know who host their own stuff, at least have mentioned some of the more like personal touches. Does that go a long way to repeat? Is it like, how essential is that to like really cater high level towards, your guest that's coming in with, whatever, a gift basket or goods in the fridge or whatever?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Really how it's designed, especially depending on the market you're at, I believe is what ultimately determines your price strategy, right? Because there's, a lot of people don't think about this, but sometimes I can actually make more money at 80% occupancy in a month than 100% occupancy in a month, right? Because how it's designed, what it looks like, some of the amenities or the services that you provide ultimately determine your price, which determines your avatar, right? And when I'm, I know Dr. Rachel, she's out in Atlanta, shout out to her. She's known for luxury Airbnbs, and she actually cakes her margins. Like she actively tries to get 50 to 60% occupancy because she's targeting a very specific avatar that's luxury, but she's charging like $500 a night. Right. And so to answer your question directly, like understanding who you're serving is going to really determine more or less how much money to spend. And with that, we can naturally see where there's a saturation. Typically it's going to be the new investor that steps in and is trying to get by with a quick buck. And so they're buying things at Walmart, Amazon, you know what I mean? And they're just doing it themselves. Not to say that you still can't get away with that. Yeah. Exactly. Right. And so I
was just going to say for you guys, are you guys kind of blending some of those things, or is it dependent on the property, dependent on the buy?
I'd say you probably could consider us, the majority of us, luxury. So we're
That's
spending
cool.
significantly more money on actually getting the property set up than most of our competitors. And because of that, I mean, I got a lot of friends in this space in the same market that are calling me and they're saying, "Hey, I'm struggling," and I'm not, frankly. And a lot of that is because our avatar tends to be people that
That
are spending a little
higher
bit more money. Exactly. Right. And so,
end.
and I won't say that that same principle is going to work across the board because, there's different, cities and every market's different, but just understanding where the money's at. And right now in a recession, it's going to be with the upper middle class and the upper
Yeah.
class, right? Because those people are
Totally.
still going to travel, but now they're just traveling maybe a notch down. And if you're within that, you're still good, right? And so,
And there's probably, I would say, to a lot of the last couple of years, right? The market's been ripping, and I'm sure there was just a surplus of people entering the space that are probably now going to a little bit weed out. Do you feel as people are coming out, obviously this is your main business, you guys are going all in, is now a good time? And you kind of said it at the beginning, which I love, like, right? Like if you're looking to do any type of single family rental, it might be the only type of rental you can do. What is, just on some of the stuff you said, right? You guys spend a little more. What do you think kind of ballpark wise, normal, 2-3 bedroom, single family home should people be putting into their contingency plans of, cause you furnish them and you go and you put the
yep.
amenities in. What kind of hard costs are you looking at up front to put together like a good performing property?
I'd say for a good performing property, you're all in between 25 and 32 grand for a 3-bedroom,
Okay.
4-bedroom house. That's here in Utah, right?
Yeah.
And I'd even say that's probably in, some of the surrounding states, West Coast states. But I'd say in the Airbnb space, you just have to understand you're going to spend money to make money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is a
Yeah.
game of ebbs and flows, meaning that some months you may go negative, right? But then there's going to be other months where it's just really caking, which is why I tend to like kind of the more consistent, which tends to be in kind of the more residential areas. But for
Yeah.
sure,
Really
you're going to
cool. I would
spend a
have never
pretty
thought of
penny.
that strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, to your point, I mean, it's, you just don't want to, you get what you pay for, right?
Yeah.
And so
Mm-hmm.
you want to make sure you're spending the right money in the right places. So
Kind of just last thing, this has been super good. It's honestly given me a lot of stuff to think about. I know a lot of a ton of the listeners will get a ton out of this. Everybody's looking at it, but I don't know very many people that are super well versed in it, that are doing it at a high level like you guys are. For somebody like myself, right, where the majority of my real estate portfolio is purposely driven to allow me to continue to do my main thing really well. Bigger purchases, multifamily, commercial, or management, everything's in place. Is Elk Ridge, I mean, do you guys feel kind of a way that people can come in and play the STR game a little more passively to like keep as a piece of their portfolio? Is that kind of would you say that's the value add?
100%. I think especially in multifamily, it makes a lot of sense. Mostly because when you have, let's just call it a 10 unit, I mean, there's really no risk in just having 3 or 4 of the units be STRs while you make sure you cake your margin on the other 6, right? It's extremely flexible, and that's what I tell everybody, especially in the multifamily space. It's like, look, if you don't have some way, shape, or form of STR midterm rentals in your portfolio, there's for sure money left on the table. Right. Because what people don't, a lot of the other value adds of a good operator like ourselves will bring is eyes in different places. Currently, I'm hosting about 15 insurance contracts. These are families that their house burnt down and they are currently being taken care of by the insurance company. And so I'm getting a check cut from the insurance company to house this family. Right. And the margins on that, I have one property. It's a single family, 4-bedroom. They're literally paying me $7,000 a month to house
Wow.
this family, right? And the contract's for a year. That's a year contract, right? And that's just
that's crazy.
Oh yeah, no. And the vendor space, being a vendor in the insurance space, is extremely lucrative. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of relationship building. That's where I really hang my hat on the door to door when it comes to that, because that's helped me a ton. But what's funny, Ty, is like that's just one of the many spaces. There's insurance, there's government, there's tech, right? All of these industries have a budget that they're spending on hotels right now, right? Mm-hmm. 8 out of 10 people are going to want to stay in an Airbnb versus a hotel. So me as an operator,
10 out of 10 if it's a nice place.
Exactly, right?
The kitchen and your kid and you're displaced.
Exactly. Just a lot more amenities, a lot more freedom, a lot more space.
Wow,
and so me as an operator, I'm just trying to leverage as much as I can to get as much demand as I can. And I've looked at this industry in a very different way. The demand is out there with the amount of people and amount of industries that have a budget for traveling clients or vendors. Really, it just comes down to my grit. Like, how much am I willing to do to go capture that audience? But that's why I tell everybody, like, look, if you have a portfolio right now and you're not leveraging the short-term and mid-term game right now, there's money for sure left on the table. And that's where I can help. Yeah.
And do you do any just for people with multifamily? That's an interesting thing you said, like have 2 of the 10 units of a building being Airbnb'd out. That's really interesting. Do you do any consulting for people with some of those larger multifamily? Is it only partner or rev share type stuff?
No, that's a really good question. I do some consulting. I'm very picky on who I work with. But predominantly we're in the game of equity. So we'd like to partner with people as much as we can and where we can, obviously bringing as much value to that space as we can too. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, dude, my head's spinning a little bit. I'll be honest with you. There's some stuff to think about. I love the creativity in this space. I think that's where it's so cool. There's just so much value that could be added. Never even thought about the insurance and government contracts. How many people are getting moved from here to there and they got to spend the freaking money anyway.
Absolutely.
That's really cool.
Well, dude, it's you had Chris Pre on here. Shout out to him, creative finance. Then you just start stacking, right? I mean, now it's come a game of creative acquisitions to all of these creative ways of making money once you have the asset. So it's game changing for sure.
That's way cool. Well, man, we super appreciate you hopping on. Where can people keep track of you, learn more from you, and keep getting nuggets and maybe even partner with you?
For sure. So my Instagram handles my name. So Hailame, H-A-I-L-A-M-E-K. And then my company is Elkridge Management. You can find us on Insta as well. Elkridge MGMT.
Love it. Love it. Well, it's a pleasure, man. Lame is a good friend of mine. Definitely follow him. Check him out. Dude's a stud. He's been grinding for a long time. I can speak to his character, to his personal references. He's the guy. He is the dude. But until next time, we'll catch you on the money game.
Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media.
Real money. Real money. Money is the answer.
Y'all be cool. And we'll see you next time on the Money Game.
Money. Yes!